The sun hung low in the Enugu sky, painting the horizon in shades of orange and gold. Jidenna sat on a wobbly stool outside his one-room apartment, strumming a battered guitar with a missing string. His music, soft and mournful, drifted into the air, ignored by the bustling neighbors who were too busy fetching water, haggling over vegetables, or scolding children to pay him any attention. He glanced at the half-empty plate of jollof rice with no meat beside him, the meager remnants of what his pregnant wife had managed to cook with the money she made from sweeping people's compounds. His stomach rumbled, but he ignored it, pouring his frustration into his music. Jidenna was a poor man who believed he was destined to be a great entertainer, and so he would do nothing else than come up with songs that no one was interested in listening to. "Jidenna!" cried the landlord that morning, as he had had enough of Jidenna's noise with his broken guitar. "How long are you going to keep up with this? Rent is due, and I heard you and your wife quarreling the other day. Is this how you want to raise your child when your wife gives birth? Wake up, drop this useless music of a thing and get to work. You have 1 week to pay the rent that you owe." "A king is not recognized in his shut that pie-hole of a mouth," shouted the landlord's wife. "Shut it, you good-for-nothing man. I wonder what your wife sees in you. Send her back to her father's house if you cannot take care of her. You have 1 week to come up with the rent. My husband is serious this time." Jidenna didn't reply. He simply adjusted the makeshift strap on his guitar, a strip of old fabric, and kept strumming. That night, his friendly neighbor rushed into his house with a phone. "A hospital just called now," the neighbor said hurriedly. "They said they would call back in a minute. It is your wife." "Where is your wife?" "She has not returned from work," Jidenna said, sitting up. The neighbor could not believe her ears. "Have you seen the time?" she screeched. "And you are lying there!" The phone rang immediately, and then he picked up. He nodded and nodded, sighed and smiled, and then cut it. He put his hand on his head. His anxiety was palpable. "I am about to become a father," he said. He quickly decided that he should go to a bar and play some music so he could get some money to avoid going empty-handed to the hospital. This was a stupid idea because 1 hour at the bar turned to 2 hours, then 5, then the next morning came, and he never got to play anything because there were much better musicians who sang and played all night. He got to the hospital defeated, only to see that his wife was no longer there. But she had dropped a note. "Dear Jidenna, my father got tired of giving you a chance. He took me away against my will to the north. Please find me and bring me back. I don't want to stay another day with him. It is you I want, and you that I love." Jidenna read the letter over and over again, tears dripping down his eyes. He wiped his eyes dry after a moment, deciding that she was better off with her parents. He was going to try to make it before going back to get her, no matter how long it took. Jidenna walked back to his apartment, the weight of the day hanging heavy on his shoulders. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, leaving the streets of Enugu dark and quiet. As he approached his door, he stopped in his tracks. His eyes widened as he saw his belongings scattered outside, the rickety stool, his guitar case, the torn bag of clothes all tossed out in a messy heap. Standing by the pile was the landlord, arms folded, looking as unimpressed as ever. "I told you, Jidenna," the landlord said, his voice rough. "Enough of this nonsense. Rent is due and I'm tired of waiting. No more excuses. Get your things and get out. I don't want to see you here again." Jidenna stood still, his mind reeling. His guitar was the first thing he noticed, its strings broken, the case cracked open. His hands shook as he stepped closer to it, but he couldn't bring himself to touch it. It felt like everything he'd worked for was slipping through his fingers. "It broke as we were moving out your things," the landlord scoffed, stepping forward. "It was of no use to you anyway. Just leave it and go find yourself a proper job. This is the last warning." Jidenna didn't respond. Instead, he bent down and pulled out a crumpled newspaper clipping from the pile of debris. The headline read, "The String King, a tragic rise to fame after personal loss." He stared at the image of a man, a banjo player whose music had taken off only after he lost his wife. The irony stung. Jidenna had been through the same heartbreak, and yet his music seemed destined to remain unheard. Without a word, Jidenna stood up, stuffing the clipping into his pocket. The landlord gave him one last look, then turned, muttering something under his breath. "You've got a week. Don't come back here if you don't have the money." With nothing left to lose, Jidenna wandered through the streets, seeking something to hold on to. His stomach churned with hunger, his mind spinning with thoughts of how to make money. He stumbled upon a construction site where men worked under the harsh sun, shoveling sand and hauling bricks. The site manager, a burly man with arms like thick tree branches, eyed Jidenna skeptically as he approached. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I need work," Jidenna said, his voice hoarse. "I'll do anything, please. I'll work hard. Just give me a chance." The manager sighed, exasperated, and motioned toward the site. "All right, fine. Get to work then. But don't slow down, or you're out." Jidenna grabbed a shovel and joined the others, struggling to match their pace. His arms were already burning, his body aching with each movement. As the hours dragged on, sweat poured down his face, his muscles screaming in protest. He struggled to keep up with the other workers, who moved with ease. His hands grew raw, his back stiff, but still, he worked. One of the men nearby laughed at him as Jidenna slowed his pace, unable to keep up. "Man, you better keep moving," one of them said with a grin. "If the boss sees you slacking, you won't get paid." Jidenna didn't respond. He couldn't. His body had reached its limit. He slowed his pace, managed to move to a secluded spot, then dropped to the ground, unable to keep going. The shovel slipped from his hand, and he closed his eyes, letting sleep take over. The night had fallen when Jidenna woke with a start. The site was eerily silent, the workers long gone. His mind still hazy, he heard something in the distance, a soft, melodic sound, like the gentle plucking of strings. It called to him, pulling him like a magnet. He followed the sound until he found himself near the edge of the site, where the ground seemed disturbed, as though something had been buried there long ago. Without thinking, he rushed to get the shovel and began to dig, his movements almost automatic. He thought he heard someone move, even saw a moving shadow, but he ignored it and continued digging. After what felt like an eternity, his shovel struck something hard. His pulse quickened. He cleared the dirt away, revealing a banjo, old and dusty, its wood worn smooth with age. Strange glowing runes were carved into its surface, and Jidenna's fingers trembled as he reached for it. He strummed the strings, and the sound that filled the air was like nothing he'd ever heard. It was beautiful, otherworldly. Jidenna felt a sudden surge of energy, an unexplainable rush that made him feel invincible, as though he were destined to be something greater than he ever thought possible. For the first time in a long while he felt like a star, like he could create the music that would make the world listen. His hands moved instinctively over the banjo's strings, and for a moment, everything else, the landlord, the broken guitar, the empty apartment, faded into nothing. With the banjo in his hands, Jidenna felt invincible. He had found his purpose again. He did not sleep all night. He played and played till the next morning came. "If I can just get someone to listen," he thought to himself. "If someone would just hear me play this, I know they'll see it too." With newfound determination, Jidenna grabbed the banjo and set off for the local bar that night. The familiar buzz of the nightlife greeted him as he approached. Music spilled out from the open doors, laughter mixed with clinking glasses, and the smell of beer and cheap gin filled the air. It was his chance. Inside, the manager, a short, stout man with a thick accent, was behind the bar, wiping down glasses. He looked up as Jidenna approached, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Boss, I've got something for you," Jidenna said, a bit breathless. "I can play. I've got this new sound, and I need a chance. Just a slot to sing tonight." The manager didn't even look up from his work. "Listen, boy," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "We're only hiring professionals here, people who can fill the place, not some street singer looking for a free drink. And you stink." Jidenna's face flushed. He wasn't ready to give up just yet. "Please, give me a chance," Jidenna begged, his voice rising with urgency. "I promise you, I've got something no one else has. Just one performance. You won't regret it." The manager let out a scoff, finally glancing up. His eyes landed on the banjo Jidenna was holding, and he burst out laughing. That thing. He wiped a tear from his eye. Are you seriously trying to play with that relic? You're better off with a guitar, or nothing at all. Jidenna's hands tightened around the banjo. Just one chance, please. No, the manager said firmly. Take your toy and get out of here. This is a place for professionals. You're wasting your time. Before Jidenna could say another word, the bouncers, familiar faces from the neighborhood, stepped forward. Jidenna, come on now, one of them said, shaking his head. This is a bar for real performers. Give up this nonsense, man. You know you've got no future in this. Just get a job, eh? Stop embarrassing yourself. The words hit Jidenna harder than he wanted to admit. They were right. What was he even doing here? He didn't belong. His stomach twisted as frustration built in him like a storm. But just as he was about to turn and walk out, the bar's generator suddenly sputtered and died. The music cut out, the lights flickered, then went completely dark. The room fell into an unnatural silence. Jidenna stood frozen in the dark, the weight of his frustration pressing on him. He wanted to scream. What more do I have to do? His hands shook as they gripped the banjo. His heart thudded against his chest. He tried so hard, but it seemed like the world was intent on shutting him out. Unable to stop himself, Jidenna dropped his head, and tears blurred his vision. He wiped his eyes, his shoulders slumping as defeat washed over him. He felt like the universe was mocking him. His hands, however, had a different idea. Without thinking, his fingers found the strings of the banjo. A quiet hum escaped as they moved instinctively. A single note rang out, then another, then another. It wasn't planned, but it was beautiful. His eyes widened as the sound filled the room, rich and full of life, like something ancient and powerful. Without even realizing it, Jidenna started playing. His fingers danced across the strings, pulling out melodies he didn't know he knew. The music, soft at first, began to build, swirling around him like a force he couldn't control but didn't want to stop. Suddenly the lights flickered back on, and the chatter in the room shifted. People were staring, not at the stage where the hired performers stood, but at Jidenna. A hush fell over the bar as heads turned. The crowd, slowly, began to sway to the rhythm of his playing. It was like magic. His music was drawing them in. They weren't looking at the professionals anymore. They weren't even paying attention to the flashy singers who had been up before. They were watching him. Jidenna's heart soared as he strummed, his voice rising with the music. He began to sing, his words raw and filled with the pain of everything he'd been through. I was poor. I was broke. No one gave me a chance, he sang. Kicked out of my house, left with nothing but a dream in my hands. The words poured out of him, the song spilling from his soul. It was his story, his truth, and now for the first time, it felt like it mattered. One by one, people started dropping money into his bag. First a few coins, then notes. The more they heard, the more they gave. The pile grew, and with each drop, Jidenna felt himself coming alive in a way he never had before. The singers on stage tried to grab attention. They sang louder, they danced harder, but no one cared. The room was focused on Jidenna. The music flowed through him, and he wasn't just singing anymore. He was telling them everything he'd been holding inside for so long. By the time he finished, the room was buzzing. People were clapping, cheering, and shouting for more. Jidenna stood there, breathless, as his heart raced in disbelief. The manager, now standing nearby, had a sour look on his face. He saw the money in Jidenna's bag and scowled. "All right, kid," he said, his voice low and angry. "You did well tonight, but you owe me my cut. I'll take 80%. Jidenna's jaw tightened. The joy he felt quickly replaced by a flash of anger. 80%? You're taking most of what I earned? The manager nodded. That's the deal. You don't play here without my permission, and you don't make a cent without my share. Jidenna's fingers balled into fists, but he didn't argue. He handed over the money, every last bit, before standing up straight. I'll make it without you, Jidenna said, his voice steady now, One day you'll come begging me to play here, and I'll refuse." The manager scoffed, a smirk on his face. "You think you're that special, huh? Get out of here, and don't come back." Jidenna turned, walking out of the bar without looking back. The air outside was cool, and as he walked into the night, he knew something had changed. He had taken his first step toward greatness, and no one, not even the manager, could stop him now. Jidenna's rise to fame was nothing short of meteoric. One minute, he was a penniless musician struggling to make ends meet. The next, he was the hottest act in town. He played at local bars that slowly grew into packed venues. His banjo, now his most prized possession, became a symbol of his success. Word spread quickly about the young man with the hauntingly beautiful music. Before long, people were calling him the String King, after the famous musician who had disappeared years ago. He barely spent more than a day at any one place. Each performance seemed to take him to new heights, new cities, new faces. Everywhere he went, the crowds were bigger, the applause louder, and the money plenty. Everywhere he went, the crowds grew, the money flowed, and the women, and even men, wanted to be with him. His name was on everyone's lips. He was the hottest thing in music. At one of the old bars where he had once been humiliated and thrown out, the manager came crawling back. "Jidenna," the manager pleaded, eyes wide with desperation. "We're struggling here, man. The sales are down. The place is dead. Come back and perform for us. You know you're the only one who can bring in the crowd." Jidenna looked at him, then at the bar, his lips curling into a smile. He shook his head. "Nah, man. You turned me away once. Now look at you." He laughed, the sound mocking but with a touch of satisfaction. "I'll pass. Good luck with your little bar." He turned his back and walked away, the sound of his laughter echoing behind him. As the months passed, Jidenna's obsession with the banjo deepened. He couldn't explain it, but it felt like the instrument had a life of its own. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, he'd wake up to the sound of strings being plucked, as though the banjo were calling him. It was as though it were alive, urging him to play, to create. He barely had time to eat, his life consumed by practice, performance, and the incessant demands of his newfound fame. His fingers bled from the hours of practice, but the banjo seemed to heal him. The more he played, the better he became. His music wasn't just music anymore, it was an experience. And as he played, he began to notice something strange about his audience. The atmosphere in the room would shift depending on the songs he played. It was subtle at first, just a gentle change in the energy. But soon it became impossible to ignore. When he played a love song, the crowd seemed to become more affectionate. Couples would hold hands and whisper sweet words to each other, and occasionally, men would get on one knee to propose. Jidenna had witnessed 20 marriage proposals in just 1 week. It was when he sang about lust that things began to get wild. The bar would transform. People, once composed and respectable, would suddenly lose all inhibitions. The air would heat up as men and women started undressing, their bodies entwined with an intensity that shocked even Jidenna. He'd seen things he didn't know were possible, things happening right in front of his eyes. People, strangers, would forget themselves entirely. It was as though the music commanded them to give in to their deepest desires. And it wasn't just love or lust. One night, he sang a new song about the struggles the country was facing, about war, poverty, and hardship. The moment the last note left his lips, the room erupted into chaos. People started fighting. The atmosphere turned dangerous. Jidenna had to leave, his heart racing in fear. It wasn't just that the music was connecting with the audience, it was controlling them, and he was loving it. All he needed to do was to get more bodyguards who would always wear earbuds to cover their ears and protect him during his performances. He was lucky that no one could figure out the pattern. The songs were never repeated in the same way, and never held the same theme for long. It was as if the banjo itself was in charge, pulling the strings and deciding what would happen next. And Jidenna? He was nothing more than a conduit, a vessel for the banjo's will. Jidenna now lived in a big house, surrounded by luxury, and far from the life he used to know. Fame, money, and success, he had it all. But something didn't feel right. He was always on the road, always performing. His music was now a way of life, but he felt empty inside. One evening, while he was sitting alone in his grand living room, strumming the banjo, there was a knock at the door. He paused, his fingers stilling on the strings. He wasn't expecting anyone. Jidenna opened the door, and for a moment he stood frozen. His wife stared at him, eyes wide with disbelief. Their daughter clung to her side, her eyes round, the same look Jidenna once had when he was a boy. Thoughts rushed through his mind like a flood. He'd completely forgotten about them. The pain, the absence, all of it. His daughter, just like him, even had the same cheeky grin. As soon as he breathed her name, Amanda, she slapped him across the face. The slap stung, but it was the banjo, sitting in the corner, that reacted first. It let out a harsh, discordant strum, the sound sharp enough to make Jidenna wince. Amanda didn't flinch. She slapped him again. And again, the banjo responded, its strings singing a note of agony. Jidenna held his face, eyes stinging with shame and regret. Amanda's tears came next. "Why didn't you come find me, Jidenna?" Her voice broke as she spoke. "Did you not get my letter? I tried. I ran away after I healed. I came looking for you, but they said you weren't there. I was sent back to my father. And when I got back, he slapped me. Hard. I can't hear properly anymore, Jidenna. You've done this to me." Jidenna's heart dropped into his stomach. The words hit harder than the slap. He stepped forward, pulling her into his arms, hugging her as though the weight of the world had just come crashing down. The banjo wailed again. Amanda pulled away slightly, staring at him. "Jidenna, you've lost so much weight. You weren't this lean before, even when we had nothing. What happened to you?" He sighed, lowering his head. "I've been working to make something of myself. I wanted to be somebody for you. For us." Amanda shook her head, disappointment clouding her features. "At the expense of your health? Your life, Jidenna?" She moved towards the room, her hands trembling as she spotted the banjo lying in the corner. Jidenna looked over at the instrument, an unspoken connection tugging at him. But when he stood and moved to pick it up, Amanda grabbed it first, slipping it into a bag. He felt a flicker of anger rise in him, but it was fleeting. His daughter came to him, her innocent eyes looking up at him, and all the fury vanished in an instant. Jidenna wondered where that anger had come from, but shook it off. He breathed deeply, deciding then and there he'd make time for his family. "I'm sorry, Amanda," he said quietly. "I'll make it right. I'll fix this." She smiled faintly, and for the first time in ages, Jidenna felt a weight lift off his chest. They spent the next few weeks together, eating meals, visiting the park, taking long walks. Jidenna bought his daughter toys. They laughed, they talked. The banjo stayed locked away in the bag. For a while, the music faded. But then, Jidenna received a call. It was an invitation to perform at the governor's daughter's wedding. He told Amanda and their daughter excitedly, "I'm going to sing the song I wrote for you, the one that made you fall in love with me, even when I was just a poor musician with nothing." The day of the wedding, they arrived at the reception. It was grand, food, drinks, laughter. Jidenna felt good, standing before the crowd, his wife and daughter by his side. The atmosphere was filled with joy, and he was ready to play his heart out. As he got up to perform, he smiled at Amanda, who had taken their daughter to join the guests across the room. But when he strummed the first note, something shifted inside him. The banjo hummed under his fingers, and as he sang, his heart was filled with love and happiness, until, out of nowhere, a cold wave of dread washed over him. He frowned as his eyes met Amanda's and his daughter, who smiled at him. Something was wrong. The music changed. Without him knowing why, his voice shifted into a deeper, darker tone. He sang about war, about pain, about the struggles he'd faced growing up. At first the crowd was silent. Then the tension started to build. The bride suddenly stood up, her face twisted in anger. "You're a liar!" she shouted at the groom, her voice breaking. "You cheated on me!" Then to the crowd she screamed even louder. He has been sleeping with our gateman! The room erupted in chaos. People shouted and pushed each other, the air thick with anger. Then Jidenna heard it. A scream. His daughter. He turned just in time to see one of the wedding guests, their hand raised high, a knife in it. The blade sank into her side. "No!" Jidenna screamed, rushing forward, but before he could reach her, the security guards grabbed him, pulling him away from the fight. Blood spilled everywhere. Jidenna didn't care about his safety. He struggled with them to let him go. "My wife and my child," he screamed. He only wanted his wife and daughter. He fought to get to them, and they took all of them out of the hall, the banjo hanging behind Jidenna. Finally, they were out of the chaos. The bodyguards ushered him away, and he held his daughter in his arms, her small body limp and covered in blood. Amanda was crying profusely. As they drove away, Amanda's mind began to make sense of it all. Though she was partly deaf, she could still catch snatches of the song. She distinctly remembered the shift in her emotions when Jidenna's music played, how her feelings changed when she focused on it, and when she was facing him. When the music shifted, anger stirred inside her. But when she wasn't facing him, when the sound didn't hit her directly, her emotions felt neutral. The sudden, sharp change in how she felt when the sound hit her ears directly and when it didn't was impossible to ignore. Something wasn't right. They got to the hospital, and Jidenna, his banjo hanging behind him, carried his daughter and with Amanda. They both ran to the hospital. Amanda was crying profusely. The doctors took her daughter in and asked them to sit on the chairs at the reception. As they both sat down, the realization hit Amanda like a slap to the face. She turned to Jidenna, her voice shaking with both fear and anger. "It's the music, Jidenna. It's the banjo." Jidenna looked at her, his expression blank. What do you mean?" "Don't you see?" she cried. "The music, it's not just songs. It's controlling them. It's feeding them whatever it wants. When you played about love, they acted loving. When you sang about war, they fought. And now, look at what it's done. Look at our daughter." Jidenna's face paled as the truth sank in. "Jidenna," she said, her voice breaking, "the banjo has to go." Jidenna stared at her, his hands trembling as he held the instrument. What do you mean?" Amanda's voice shook with anger and sadness as she reached for the banjo, but Jidenna pulled it away from her, a fierce look in his eyes. "No," he said, his voice cold. "You don't understand. This is my chance, Amanda. This is how I get to the top. I can't stop now." "Look at us!" Amanda screamed. "Your daughter is fighting for her life because of this cursed banjo?" She tried to take it from him. There was a struggle as Jidenna tried to resist her. He pushed her to the ground and picked the banjo up. Amanda was shocked. It was as though she was invisible as Jidenna checked if any part of the banjo had been damaged. His hands trembled as he ran his fingers over the banjo, checking every string. He was too distracted to hear the doctor's footsteps approaching or Amanda running to meet them. They lingered by the door, their faces grim, until Amanda's screams broke the silence. Jide, our daughter is gone." Her voice cracked with grief, the words tearing at him more than any physical wound ever could, yet he didn't react. His eyes were still fixed on the banjo, every fiber of his being consumed with the thought that it had to be intact, that it had to be fine. "Jide, listen to me!" Amanda screamed again, shaking him by the shoulder, but he barely noticed. "She lost too much blood, Jide." Her voice wavered as if her spirit was unraveling right there in front of him. "Just give me a minute," Jidenna mumbled, his voice flat. He was still checking the strings, making sure nothing was broken. The banjo was the only thing that mattered right now. Amanda stepped back, shocked and furious. "It was a mistake for me to come back," she shouted, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this. I just can't." She turned and ran out of the hospital room, leaving him alone with the banjo. He wanted to go after her, but how could he do that when he was not sure if the banjo was working perfectly? He had to be sure. After he was satisfied that the banjo was okay, he discussed with the doctors on what to do and the mortuary arrangements and left the hospital. It was when he had safely kept the banjo in its room and lay down on his bed, did he begin to think normally again. Everything felt wrong. The house was empty. His daughter was gone. Amanda was gone. He felt numb. Jidenna cried, harder than he ever had before, his shoulders shaking with the weight of his grief. The pain of losing his daughter was a raw, unbearable ache. He reached for his phone, hoping to hear Amanda's voice, hoping for some sign of life. But the call went unanswered. His heart pounded in his chest as he lay on the couch, the banjo on the other room. The night was quiet, the stillness hanging in the air like a suffocating blanket. And then it began. The banjo played on its own. A gentle, soothing melody filled the room, calming the storm of grief in his mind, though it did nothing to quiet the emptiness in his heart. Jidenna closed his eyes, the music lulling him into sleep. In the dream, he saw a woman, soft, kind, with an aura of grace. She was caring for a man whose face Jidenna could not see, but who was clearly broken. The man seemed determined to give up, to waste away in self-pity. Yet the woman persisted. She told him that no matter how long it took, she would always be there for him. "You will make it in life," she said softly. "Even if it takes you 100 years. I will be there when you do." But then the dream changed. The man was rich now, successful. But the woman was gone. Jidenna could feel the sadness in the air. The dream changed again. The woman appeared once more, this time singing softly to herself. Her voice, though gentle, was full of an ancient sadness, like a prayer to something beyond. "You belong to me now," she said menacingly. "No one can stand in the way of us. I've already taken your daughter, and if you go back to your wife, she will be next." Jidenna's mind raced as the dream collapsed into darkness, and he awoke with a start. His breath was heavy, his hands clammy. The banjo was still playing in the other room, the same haunting melody swirling through the air. His body trembled with a sense of urgency. He knew what he had to do. The morning light crept into the room, casting long shadows across the floor. But Jidenna pretended to be cheerful. His smile was forced, his eyes never really seeing what was in front of him. He had a plan now. It was a plan that would bring him peace, or so he hoped. The banjo had taken everything from him. It had stolen his family, his happiness, and perhaps even his soul. But today, he was going to put an end to it, whether it killed him or not. "Good morning, sir," said his driver, Daniel, greeting him with a nod as Jidenna stepped into the car. Jidenna returned the smile with a hollow one of his own. "Morning, Daniel. We've got work to do." They drove in silence, the streets outside whizzing by. Jidenna's mind wasn't on the road. It was fixed on one thing: finding out more about the banjo, no matter what it took. When they arrived at the location where he'd first found the banjo, Jidenna felt the weight of disappointment hit him like a punch to the chest. The old, unfinished building was gone, replaced by a towering shopping mall, its glass windows gleaming in the sunlight. Jidenna stood frozen, staring at the sight as if waiting for the ground to swallow him whole. "Is this the place?" Daniel asked, looking around. Jidenna nodded. He quickly pulled out the picture of the banjo, showing it to passers-by, asking if anyone knew anything about it. The responses were mixed. Some gave him strange looks, others shook their heads. One man, an older shopkeeper, pointed him to a nearby banjo shop, and that was where his frustration began to mount. "Banjo shop?" Jidenna muttered to himself. "That's not what I'm looking for." The driver gave him a confused glance, but Jidenna didn't notice. As they walked back to the car, something strange caught his eye. An old beggar, ragged and filthy, sitting on the street corner, his face weathered by time and hardship. The beggar held out his hand, asking for money. Without hesitation, Jidenna reached into his pocket and pulled out a few notes, handing them over. "Thank you, sir," the beggar rasped, his hand lingering on Jidenna's for a moment longer than necessary. He smelt strongly of rotten fruits. Jidenna pulled his hand away, puzzled. "It's nothing. Just take it." The beggar looked him in the eye, his gaze sharp despite his disheveled appearance. "You're a string player, aren't you?" he asked, his voice suddenly filled with strange certainty. A good one, too. But you've taken something that's not yours. That banjo, it's cursed, my friend. Jidenna froze, his heart hammering in his chest. What do you know about the banjo? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. The beggar grinned, a toothless, eerie smile spreading across his face. I saw you that night, digging in the dirt, pulling that cursed thing from the ground. I tried to follow you, but I was too weak. By the time I could get to you, you were gone. Jidenna's blood ran cold. He remembered that night as if it was yesterday. The banjo had practically called to him. It was like fate or something darker had pushed him to dig it up. And now the beggar was telling him that the banjo had a story he needed to hear. I want to return it, Jidenna said, his voice trembling slightly. Tell me more about it. The beggar chuckled softly, the sound low and guttural. It's not my story to tell. But if you want, I can take you to the man who owns it, if you're ready to hear the truth. Jidenna nodded without hesitation. Take me. All right, the beggar said, but you'll regret it. Jidenna waved off his warning and motioned for Daniel to follow them. Daniel looked hesitant, but Jidenna's resolve was firm. He wasn't going to stop now. The car now smelled of stale beer, fish, and unwashed clothes as they drove through the city. The beggar sat next to Jidenna in the back seat, muttering strange things under his breath. Jidenna kept his eyes forward, though his mind raced with questions. After what felt like hours, they pulled up to a psychiatric hospital. The building was old, its walls peeling and weathered. It looked like a place where souls came to rest, or where they went to fade away. This is it, the beggar said, grinning as he led Jidenna inside. As he moved past Jidenna, he now smelled strongly of rotten onions. Jidenna hesitated, but the beggar was already walking through the doors. To his surprise, the staff didn't stop him. They let the beggar pass without question, like he had some kind of permission. Wait here, Jidenna told his driver, who seemed uneasy. I'll be outside, the driver replied, glancing at the door nervously. Inside, the hospital was eerily quiet. The walls seemed to close in on Jidenna as the beggar led him down a long corridor. They reached a room where an older man was lying on a bed, his eyes fixed on the television. On the screen, Jidenna could see himself performing, the crowd cheering, the spotlight shining down on him. As soon as the man saw Jidenna, he sat up. You took my life, he said, his voice hoarse, like he hadn't spoken in years. Jidenna swallowed hard, his heart racing. I didn't mean to, he said, his voice trembling. The man laughed bitterly. No one ever means to. I abandoned my life a long time ago. It was fair game for anyone who came along. Jidenna's gaze shifted to the wall, where a photograph of a woman hung. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized her face. It was the same woman from his dreams. You know her? Jidenna asked, pointing to the picture. The man nodded slowly, his expression sad. Her name was Rita. She was my fiancée. She disappeared after I lost everything, after I gave it all up for the banjo. She was going to be the one to save me. But I lost her too. Jidenna's mind reeled. The woman in his dreams, the one who had threatened to destroy his family, she was connected to this man, and somehow she was connected to him as well. The man's voice softened, as if he knew what Jidenna was thinking. She's not done with you yet. She's going to use that banjo to take everything from you, just like she did to me. That is the price you pay for loving someone too much. Jidenna sat back, staring at the man across from him, his mind struggling to absorb what he had just heard. The story the man had shared was too bizarre, too unreal. And yet, something about the man's haunted eyes told Jidenna that this was no simple tale. The confusion gnawed at him. I don't understand, Jidenna finally spoke, his voice strained with disbelief. How did she take everything from you? What exactly happened? The man sighed heavily, his face clouded with regret. His hands trembled slightly as he clasped them together, his gaze drifting toward the floor as though the weight of the years bore down on him all at once. You see, the man began slowly, as though every word was a struggle. I was getting really popular. My music, my name, it was all taking off. I was finally starting to feel like I could make it. But with the fame came the pressure. The girl, he pointed at the picture on the wall. My girl, she started getting jealous. She couldn't handle it. She said I was changing, that I was forgetting her. So we fought, and I hit her. His voice broke as he said the last words, shame and guilt flooding his expression. I was taken to court for it, he continued, his eyes red-rimmed, the memory still fresh. The deal they offered me was simple. Never sing again, never touch music, or go to jail. I took the deal. I thought it was over. But I didn't know what the cost would be. Jidenna frowned, trying to piece together the fragments of the man's life, but his thoughts kept circling back to the same question. Where does the banjo fit into all of this? Okay, but what does all of this have to do with the banjo? Jidenna asked, gesturing toward the object still resting between them, its dark wood gleaming in the dim light. I'm still not seeing the connection. How does that thing... He shook his head, baffled. How does that even factor in? The man's eyes flickered to the beggar, who had remained silent throughout their conversation, his frail figure a ghostly presence in the background. The beggar's eyes locked with the man's, an unspoken understanding passing between them. The man nodded, as if bracing himself for the next part of the truth. It's not just a banjo, Jidenna. It's more than that. Much more. I was desperate. I didn't have a job, no music, no future. Her parents, they were pressuring me too. They wanted me to make something of myself. I was at my breaking point. His voice trembled slightly as he said the words, the memories of his desperation still raw. Jidenna's heart tightened. He knew that feeling all too well, the constant pressure to succeed, to be someone, even when it felt like you were drowning. Fame didn't seem like such a curse when it was just a dream, but once it was a reality, it could destroy you. I get it, Jidenna muttered, nodding in understanding. The pressure, the expectation, I've been there too. The man gave him a weary smile. So, I went to a voodoo priest. He told me there was a way, that I could have everything I wanted if I just followed his instructions. He said I needed to make a banjo, but not just any banjo. This one needed to be made from the wood of a cursed tree. He said it would bring me fame, power, everything I was yearning for. Jidenna's brow furrowed in disbelief. A voodoo priest. You really followed that advice? The man nodded gravely, his eyes filled with the weight of regret. At the time, I thought, what else did I have to lose? I was willing to try anything. So, I made the banjo, just like he said. And at first, it worked. I became famous. People loved my music. But the man's face darkened again, his fingers tightening around the edges of the table as though he were trying to hold himself together. Then it started. The draining, the energy, Jidenna. It wasn't just the fame, the banjo. It began to take my life, slowly, piece by piece. My health, my strength, my soul. It kept pulling at me, and I thought I could bury it, thought it would stop if I just hid it. So I buried the banjo in that building. Jidenna's stomach churned. He was starting to feel the weight of the curse, the dread that the man's story carried with it. This wasn't just a cursed object, it was something far darker. The man paused, as though fighting to steady himself before continuing. But it didn't stop. It kept calling to me, and when I couldn't take it anymore, I ended up in the hospital. My body was falling apart, and the doctors couldn't explain why. It was the banjo, Jidenna. I know it now. Jidenna's eyes flicked to the instrument again. It sat so innocently, as though it couldn't possibly be the source of all this misery. But the man was looking at it like it was a living thing, something that had power over him. Jidenna's confusion deepened. But I didn't know what to do, the man continued, his voice strained. So I prayed. I prayed that someone would come along and take it. And then, after all this time, you showed up, and it chose you. Jidenna froze, his heart pounding in his chest. I don't understand. Yes. The beggar spoke up, his voice rough but calm. The banjo chose you. I've been watching for years, hoping someone would come, but it never called to anyone until you came in, Jidenna. The moment you touched it, I knew it was you. Jidenna froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Me? I thought, the man's voice faltered again, that I would get better if someone else found it. But nothing has changed. The banjo is still here, and it's still draining me. Now I know what I need to do. I need you to destroy it. Completely. And without warning, without hesitation, and without a moment's thought, Jidenna took the banjo and hit it on the wall. It shattered in half. He hit it again. It shattered in quarters. Hit it again till the floor was filled with broken wood and tangled strings. There, said Jidenna. Case solved. In that moment, the two men began to laugh. The beggar hoarsely, and the man with difficulty. Jidenna only had a moment of confusion because before his eyes, the banjo repaired itself back and became brand new again. Do you think I have not tried that? The man asked, incredulously. You must destroy the tree whose wood was used to make the banjo. That is the only way to destroy it. Jidenna stood up suddenly, pacing back and forth in agitation. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to find this cursed tree. The man's face softened with sympathy. You'll find it. You have to. But you'll need to go to the village, the one where the tree grows, and you'll need to take the right tools. Cutlasses, hoes, pickaxes. And don't forget the food, because the villagers need to be appeased. The curse, it's not just on you, but everyone connected to you. Jidenna's thoughts were spinning. He couldn't ignore this. If there was even a chance that the curse was real, he had to try. For his own sake, and for the sake of those around him. But some things did not add up. How come he was taken straight to court when he hit his wife? Why not jail? Also, for some reason, he was not convinced that he felt remorseful about losing his wife. As the thought swelled around his head, he decided to blurt it out and tackle the banjo first. Once it was destroyed, he would ask for the truth and the full story. If only he had known. It had been weeks since Jidenna left the psychiatric hospital and spoken to the old owner of the banjo. He had been having second thoughts about going to the village where the old banjo owner had asked him to go to have it destroyed. Jidenna sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the banjo that had appeared once again, as it had been doing this past few weeks. The wood was worn, the strings stretched tight with a threatening hum, as if it was alive, ready to play its own dark tune. His hands trembled at his sides, the same hands that had tried so many times to destroy it, the same hands that had failed him. Maybe if I burn it one more time, he thought, it'll be gone for good. But deep inside, Jidenna knew it wouldn't work. Nothing ever did. He had tried everything to rid himself of the cursed instrument. He'd burned it in the backyard, but by morning, it was back on his bed, unscathed. He'd left it on the street, but it was there when he returned home. He'd thrown it from his second-floor window, only to find it perched delicately on his pillow, as if it had never been thrown at all. A knock on his door pulled him out of his spiraling thoughts. His driver, Daniel, stood in the doorway, his face a mixture of excitement and concern. "Sir," Daniel said, stepping inside, "are you ready?" "The car's packed. We leave at dawn." Jidenna forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. He glanced at the banjo, then back at Daniel. "I don't know, Daniel. I don't know if I'm ready." "Everything will be fine," assured Daniel. "You have explained everything to me. This has to be done. Sir, we leave at dawn." And without another word, he left Jidenna and shut the door. The next morning, the car was packed and ready. Jidenna's heart hammered in his chest as he donned the banjo, strapping it around his back like a burden he could never escape. Daniel and some men had loaded the back of the car with all the supplies they would need: hoes, cutlasses, pickaxes, chainsaws, ropes. And there was the beggar, the strange man who had led them this far, the one who'd promised to show them the path to the tree. He was now cleaner, but he smelled strongly of gutter water. All the men avoided him as they entered the car, but it made no difference. They could smell him in the car. As they drove through the winding roads, Jidenna couldn't shake the feeling that the banjo was watching him, waiting. He tried to remain calm, but as they neared the village, something shifted in the air. It was subtle at first, a chill, an unnatural feeling of dread. And then, without warning, the banjo began to play, a violent, discordant chord that rattled Jidenna's bones. "Damn it!" Daniel slammed on the brakes, his eyes wide with alarm. "What the hell is that?" The car swerved, and before anyone could react, it tipped over. The sound of metal twisting, glass shattering, and the tires screeching filled the air. The world spun as the car crashed to the ground, tossing everyone inside like rag dolls. Jidenna was the first to pull himself free from the wreckage, his body sore, but miraculously unharmed. The beggar was already on his feet, his face twisted into a strange grin, though there was no joy in it, only a knowing, terrible look. "She's resisting," the beggar murmured, his voice almost playful. "She knows her time is near." Before Jidenna could ask what he meant, the beggar turned and started walking away, heading into the thickening woods. Daniel scrambled to his feet, and the others followed. One of their men, however, lay motionless on the ground. He was dead. "We walk from here," the beggar called back, and with that, they began the trek into the wilderness. As they walked deeper into the forest, the trees grew denser, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The moon above was bright, its pale light casting long shadows over the path. The banjo, strapped to Jidenna's back, began to hum again, louder now, louder than ever before. The air grew thick with tension, and the path grew more treacherous as the vines began to curl around their legs, slowing their progress. The beggar muttered something under his breath, but Jidenna couldn't hear him over the furious melody of the banjo. And then, as they reached a clearing, the music reached a fever pitch. The banjo's strings rattled, vibrating violently. The earth beneath them seemed to shudder, as though something vast and ancient was awakening. Jidenna's hands, already raw from his previous attempts to destroy the instrument, began to ache as if the banjo was drawing him in. The air was thick with magic now, palpable and oppressive. Something terrible was about to happen. Jidenna barely had time to register the sound before something reached out from the shadows, a massive, writhing vine, its tendrils quick as lightning. With a sickening crack, the vine wrapped itself around one of the men, pulling him into the air with terrifying strength. The man screamed as his body twisted and jerked, his cries drowned out by the ferocious music of the banjo. "Run!" the beggar shouted, his voice hoarse with panic. His face, normally sunken and emotionless, was now twisted with fear. "Don't look back! Don't stop running!" Without thinking, Jidenna and the remaining men sprinted down the path, the sound of their heavy footsteps blending with the frenzied music of the banjo. But as they ran, more vines surged from the underbrush, faster than they could dodge. Another man was snatched from behind, the vine lifting him off the ground before pulling him into the choking darkness. His scream was abruptly cut short. The remaining group, Jidenna, the beggar, and the two other men, ran for their lives, now only 4 in number. The surrounding woods seemed alive, twisting and writhing with malevolent intent. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie light across the path, but it did little to calm their rising fear. "We have to keep me alive," the beggar rasped, grabbing Jidenna by the arm as they stumbled through the thickening undergrowth. His grip was firm, insistent. "I must be kept alive, Jidenna. I am the key. Only I can complete the ritual. Without me, everything is lost." The banjo kept playing, its song maddening, hypnotic, its music wrapping around them like a cocoon. The tension in the air thickened, vibrating with a terrible energy. Suddenly, from the shadows ahead, skeletal figures emerged. They were tall and unnaturally thin, their bones wrapped in vines and rotting leaves. Their eyes were hollow, their skin stretched tight across their bones, decayed beyond recognition. Each carried an eerie, ancient weapon, a scythe, a sickle, a rusted spear. The men froze. The skeleton's hollow eyes seemed to pierce through them, and then they moved, slowly, deliberate, like they had all the time in the world. One of the remaining men, his face pale with terror, took a step back. "No, no!" he screamed, trying to run, But the skeletons were quicker. They lunged forward, their skeletal fingers grabbing him by the shoulders, pulling him into the air. He struggled, kicking, screaming, but his voice was lost as the vines twisted around him, pulling him to the ground, his body going limp. Another scream echoed through the trees. "Don't stop!" the beggar shouted. "Run, Jidenna, run!" But Jidenna didn't move. His legs refused to obey, his heart pounding in his chest. The music from the banjo, it was too loud, too much. It was drowning him. The sound was hypnotizing, pulling at the very fabric of his mind, making him feel as if he were losing control of himself. Then something snapped inside him. Jidenna could no longer stand it. He grabbed the banjo from his back, feeling the heat of the strings sear into his skin, and struck a chord. He screamed with pain as the strings burned his fingers, but he kept playing. For the first time since he had touched it, the banjo responded. It fought back, resisting his touch, but Jidenna held on. The skeletons stopped, their motion frozen in place as though they were waiting for some signal, some command. Their hollow eyes seemed to lock onto Jidenna, their skulls cocked in curiosity. Jidenna struck another note, louder this time. The air vibrated with energy. The skeletons backed away, retreating into the shadows, waiting for the next move. He could feel it. The banjo was alive. It was playing with him, against him. The music it played was maddening and unpredictable. But there was something else in Jidenna. Something ancient, something more powerful than anything. His will. The ground trembled as he played, as the banjo and Jidenna fought for control. The strings burned hotter now, like molten metal, digging into his hands. His skin began to peel away, the blood dripping freely from his fingertips, but still, he played. "I cannot stop now," Jidenna thought, his head spinning. He could feel the banjo pulling him in deeper, could feel the very earth shifting beneath his feet. And then, something shifted in the woods ahead. A new pathway had appeared. It was small at first, almost imperceptible, but as Jidenna kept playing, the path opened wider. His eyes followed it, and there, just ahead, stood the tree. It was enormous, towering over them like a nightmare made real. Its gnarled trunk seemed to breathe, inhaling and exhaling with a low, rasping sound, and its roots curled upward like fingers stretching toward the sky. The tree was unlike any he had ever seen. Standing alone in the middle of the clearing, its leaves only at the very top, over 30 feet in the air, casting shadows that seemed to creep along the ground like living things. The music from the banjo grew louder and sharper. It was as if the tree itself was answering, resonating with the notes. "This is it," Jidenna thought. "This is the tree." The air grew even thicker, suffocating as they approached. The moonlight above was blinding now, the pale light making the tree look even more monstrous, more alive. The vines around the tree began to stir, slithering toward them with unnatural speed, their thickness like serpents' coils. Jidenna's heart skipped a beat as the first vine shot toward him. He didn't see it coming. The vine lashed out, heading straight for him, wrapping around his legs. It was fast, but he was faster. He had to be. Without thinking, Jidenna struck the banjo again, his hands shaking, the pain overwhelming. He screamed as his blood poured onto the strings. But as the note reverberated through the clearing, the vine paused. It was as if the vine had been struck by some invisible force. It withdrew, slithering back into the shadows. "Keep playing, Jidenna!" the beggar urged, his voice frantic. "It's our only chance." Jidenna did not stop. His hands were raw, his body exhausted, but the banjo demanded it. The tree above them seemed to tremble, its massive branches swaying violently. The moonlight flickered, and Jidenna's vision blurred. His hands, slick with sweat and blood, struck the strings again, each note a desperate plea to keep the vines at bay. The banjo responded and the vines recoiled. The beggar seized the moment. "Cut the tree down now!" he shouted to the remaining men. "Everything you've got! Use the pickaxe, the axe, the chainsaw. We don't have much time." The men, still in shock from the horrors they had witnessed, nodded shakily and rushed toward the tree. The one with the pickaxe struck first, slamming it into the base of the trunk with a mighty crack. The one with the axe followed, hacking furiously at the gnarled wood. The man with the chainsaw roared to life the engine, his hands trembling as he pressed the blade against the bark. The tree shuddered in response, but it did not fall. Not yet. Jidenna gritted his teeth, the banjo's music reverberating through his skull, threatening to consume him. He fought back the rising panic and kept playing, each note ringing out as the battle for control between him and the banjo raged on. The men kept hacking, each blow landing harder than the last. And then, with a final scream from the chainsaw, the tree began to crack, its mighty trunk splitting open. The vines, the skeletons, the music, they all seemed to scream in protest, but it was too late. The tree had fallen. An unsettling silence hung in the air. The beggar stood frozen, his weathered hands clutching his tattered shawl. Jidenna glanced at him uneasy. The moment stretched, oppressive, until faint voices began to rise from the surrounding forest. It was as if dozens of women were arguing, their words overlapping in a cacophony of anguish and fury. The voices grew louder, and the beggar dropped to his knees, trembling as he muttered incantations under his breath. The air grew colder, and from the stump of the felled tree, a figure began to emerge. It was a familiar-looking woman to Jidenna, her form ethereal yet commanding, her swollen belly unmistakable. She was pregnant, and her gaze was fixed on the beggar with an intensity that made Jidenna take an instinctive step back. "Your incantations are worthless here," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. It was a voice heavy with sorrow and rage. "How does it feel knowing you have the blood of so many women on your hands?" The beggar's lips moved soundlessly, his eyes wide with terror. Jidenna, bewildered, turned to the spirit. The woman's gaze softened briefly as she looked at Jidenna. "I am free now, but not entirely. The banjo you carry has lost its power. It served its purpose, but I cannot move on until he confesses." She pointed a spectral finger at the beggar. Jidenna's brow furrowed. "Confesses? To what? What is she talking about?" he demanded, looking down at the beggar, who shook his head vehemently. "I know nothing of this," the beggar croaked, his voice hoarse. The spirit's expression darkened, and she took a step closer, her translucent feet hovering just above the ground. "Enough lies. Shall I recount your deeds?" Her tone was sharp, and the beggar flinched as though struck. 1972, she began, her words like a gavel falling in a courtroom. "A business tycoon wins the government contract of a lifetime, but his wife dies mysteriously soon after. 1976, a politician secures the governorship of Ebonyi State, and his wife is kidnapped and killed. 1989, a son becomes wealthy beyond imagination after his mother's sudden and tragic death. Shall I go on? 2011, a musician rises to fame following the inexplicable death of his fiancée. You were there each time, weren't you?" The beggar's breathing quickened, but he remained silent. "This time is different," the spirit continued, her voice trembling with emotion. "This time I was pregnant when you and Ebenezer decided to end my life. You took not only my life, but that of my unborn child." Her voice broke, and she paused to collect herself. "You used my essence to bless that banjo. Every string, every note bore the weight of my suffering. But my baby, she gave me strength. Her energy sustained me until I could manipulate the banjo myself." Jidenna was still confused. "I am the woman in your dreams," she cried as if she had read Jidenna's mind. "The woman in the picture in Ebenezer's room at the hospital." She frowned her face. "Ebenezer, the string king." Jidenna's mouth was dry. He tried to piece together the fragments of her story, but it felt like grasping at smoke. "Ebenezer?" he asked hesitantly. "What does he have to do with this?" The spirit's expression hardened again. "Ebenezer was my lover, and then my husband. He was a musician, struggling to find his place. I believed in him, supported him, and made contacts to help him succeed. But he grew impatient. He sought shortcuts, turned to diabolical means." Her gaze shifted back to the beggar. "You were his answer. The spiritualist who promised success in exchange for blood." She spat the words like venom. The beggar began to sob, his shoulders shaking violently. It wasn't just me," he stammered. The spirit ignored him. "Ebenezer came to me one night, desperate, and asked him if I loved him. Of course I loved him. He also asked me if I would do anything to ensure his success. Of course I would, I told him yes. He knew I was pregnant. He begged me to sacrifice our child for his success. He said that was the only way, and if I loved him, I would do it. He said we could have other children, that this was the only way. I refused, of course. Her voice softened momentarily, as if reliving the heartbreak of that night. He wouldn't let it go. Day after day he begged, pleaded, and then he changed. His love turned to hate. One day he struck me, hard. Her voice cracked and she looked away as though the memory itself burned her. I fell unconscious, but I could hear everything. He thought I was dead, and he called you. Her finger jabbed toward the beggar like a dagger. You told him I was enough, she continued, her voice growing sharper, each word laced with pain. You told him that my life, my essence, would suffice. Together, you performed the ritual. You planted this tree to seal my spirit. But you didn't know that my child, my baby, was still alive within me. Her life force sustained me, even as my soul was bound to this tree. As the tree grew, I grew as well, till I could draw energy from it instead. My life, my soul, was bound to that tree. My child's spirit clung to me, sustaining me even as I suffered unimaginable agony. Do you know what it feels like to be trapped? To feel every cut, every chisel as they fashion that banjo? It was as though my flesh was being carved, my soul shredded with each symbol carved into the wood. Her voice grew darker and colder. But then, something changed. As Ebenezer's music brought joy to others, my pain turned to power. The applause, the admiration, it fed me, it gave me strength. And I vowed to exact my revenge on both of you. The beggar looked up now, his face streaked with tears. Please, forgive me, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Have I not suffered enough? The spirit's laughter was bitter, hollow. Forgiveness? She repeated, her tone dripping with contempt. After decades of suffering, after lives ruined, you don't deserve forgiveness, but you will confess, here and now. The air around them felt heavy, thick with the tension of the past and the weight of unspoken truths. The moon hung low, its pale light filtering through the twisted branches of the fallen tree that had witnessed it all. The beggar stood trembling before the spirit woman, his hands raised in an almost defensive gesture, as though trying to ward off her fury. His eyes, wild with fear, darted between her and Jidenna, who was now nursing a bleeding hand, clutching it in pain. It's not my fault, he muttered, his voice weak, almost pleading. He glanced towards the ground, unable to meet the spirit's gaze. I only offered Ebenezer the choice, his mother, his friend, or his siblings. He chose the unborn child. What was I supposed to do? I had no idea you were even pregnant until he mentioned it. I am only a messenger. He made the choice. The spirit woman's chest heaved with rage as the truth slammed into her like a thunderclap. She staggered back, her hands pressed to her chest as her body trembled. She could hardly believe her ears. The beggar's confession shattered the last remnants of hope she had clung to. Her heart, already broken, splintered further. She let out a soft sob, a sound so fragile it might have been the wind. Her tears, once dry, flowed freely now as her body swayed with the grief that engulfed her. Jidenna winced in pain as his bleeding hand dripped onto the ground. He watched helplessly as the spirit crumbled before them, her rage slowly morphing into deep, unbearable sorrow. Wrap your hand with the leaves, she said, her voice hoarse. Her gaze flickered to the twisted branches of the tree. They'll heal you. But the music, you can never play again. Jidenna nodded mutely, his fingers already reaching for the thick, dark leaves from the tree's branches. As he wrapped his hand, the burning sting of his wounds dulled, but a sense of finality settled over him. The music, once so pure, would be lost to him forever. He pressed the leaves tighter against his palm. The sound of the spirit woman's scream shattered the night. Ebenezer, she howled, her voice raw with rage. I will kill him! Her form blurred, faster. Before Jidenna could react, she had disappeared into the night. Jidenna stared after her, his heart heavy with dread. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. "Where is she going?" he asked, his voice shaky as he wiped sweat from his brow, his hand still wrapped in the leaves. The beggar, standing a few feet away, gave a dry chuckle, though there was no amusement in it. "She's going to Ebenezer," he said simply, shrugging as though it were of little consequence. "To end him." Jidena's brow furrowed. "But why aren't you worried? She's going to kill him." The beggar's lips curled into a bitter smile. "I'm just the messenger," he said, his voice tinged with resignation. "She tormented me for years, turned me into this, a beggar, cursed me with a smell that never goes away. I've waited for this day, waited to be free, and now, thanks to you, I am." Jidena couldn't comprehend the beggar's detachment. How could someone be so indifferent to the possibility of death? But before he could question him further, the ground beneath their feet rumbled. Without warning, a lion leapt from the shadows, its jaws snapping shut around the beggar's throat with a terrifying finality. The beggar's scream echoed through the forest, but it was cut off as the lion dragged him away. The rest of the men appeared from the shadows, grabbing Jidena roughly, pulling him away from the scene. "Come on, we have to go," one of them barked, his grip firm on Jidena's arm. They didn't look back as they made their way through the dense forest, their footsteps quick and urgent. Jidena stumbled, his heart pounding in his chest and his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion. What was happening? What was the spirit woman's plan? And why did the beggar seem so calm? Eventually they reached the road, the familiar hum of civilization beckoning them forward. But Jidena couldn't shake the image of the beggar's bloodied face as the lion tore into him. Months passed, and Jidena's hand had slowly begun to heal. The scarring was minimal, but the loss of his musical abilities was something he could never ignore. It was a constant reminder of his past, of his mistakes. As he sat in his small flat, the morning papers scattered across the table, the headlines screamed at him in bold letters: "Ebenezer, the String King, found dead, apparent suicide." His heart sank as he read the stories, the details of Ebenezer's death, the accusations, and the whispers of his involvement in dark rituals. Jidena folded the paper slowly, setting it aside. The past was catching up with him, and there was nothing he could do to undo the damage. He had made his choices, and now he had to live with them. He needed to see her, to face the woman he loved, the woman he had failed. He had to make things right. So he drove to Kaduna. The town of Kaduna had changed little since he left. The streets were busier now, the air filled with the hum of a city slowly growing into its own. But when Jidena arrived at his in-laws' house, everything felt oddly familiar. The family was gathered, seated on a mat in the small courtyard, sharing a meal. As he stepped out of his car, his heart began to race. His eyes found her almost immediately. She sat across from the others, her hands resting on her swollen belly. She was heavy with child, nearly full term, almost the same time she had left him. She looked up at him, her face a mix of surprise and something else. Pain, perhaps. She started to rise, but her father, a tall, imposing figure, gestured for her to sit. "No, sit," he said firmly, his voice rich with authority. "Let him speak." The other family members quietly stood, one by one, and left them in silence. Jidena stepped forward, his throat tight with emotion. "I'm sorry," he began, his voice unsteady. "I know I can never undo the past. I broke the banjo. I made mistakes. I was possessed by fame, by greed. I didn't think about the consequences. I wasn't the man you fell in love with at that point." His voice cracked, but he pressed on. "I can't bring our daughter back, I know that. But I promise you this. I will be the best father I can be to our child. I will make up for the mistakes I made." As he spoke, her expression softened, but she didn't say a word. Then, just as his words seemed to hang in the air, she gasped. Her face twisted in pain, and with a sudden rush, water spilled from beneath her, splashing onto the ground. Her father sprang to his feet, his expression one of alarm. "She's going into labor!" he shouted. Jidena's heart pounded in his chest as he rushed to her side, helping her into his car. The drive to the hospital was a blur, filled with frantic gestures and silent prayers. Hours later, their baby boy was born, crying fiercely in the sterile, bright hospital room. They named him Jidenna, after the man who had learned the hard way the true meaning of family, sacrifice, and redemption. As they sat together in the quiet aftermath, the sun setting outside, Jidenna looked down at his son, feeling a sense of peace he had never known before.